Why ordinary people do terrible things. You hear someone begging you to stop. Their voice is strained, shaky, the kind of fear that doesn't sound performed but real. You immediately recognize the wrongness of the situation. It hits you physically, like pressure in your chest and a tightening in your throat. Every instinct tells you to refuse, to pull your hand back, to say no. But behind you, a calm and steady voice says, the experiment requires that you continue. No threat, no anger, no force, just authority spoken with complete certainty, and somehow that is enough. Your hand moves. You press the switch. On the other side of the wall, you hear a cry of pain, raw, panicked, desperate, then another, and then silence. You don't continue because you want to hurt anyone. You don't continue because you believe in what you're doing. You continue because someone told you to. Because in that moment, responsibility no longer feels like it belongs to you. This is the Milgram obedience experiment, and what it revealed about ordinary people is far darker than anyone expected. 1. Intro/concept. We like to believe that morality is something internal, something solid and self-controlled, that there is a clear line between what is right and what is wrong, and that we would never cross it. We imagine ourselves as independent thinkers, guided by conscience, immune to pressure, influence, or authority. This belief is comforting. It allows us to feel safe inside our own identity. It allows us to say, I know who I am. I could never do something like that. The idea of moral independence becomes part of how we see ourselves. But the truth is much more uncomfortable. Most people do not act based on morality. They act based on context, on expectations, on the roles they believe they are supposed to play. When the world around us suggests that something is normal, acceptable, or required, our internal sense of right and wrong becomes flexible, more flexible than we care to admit. We want to fit in. We want to be seen as cooperative. We want to avoid conflict. And without realizing it, our decisions become less about values and more about what the situation seems to demand. We are not shaped by what we think. We are shaped by the environment we are placed in, the group we stand inside, the authority we believe is legitimate, the consequences we think we cannot control. Our morality is not a fixed object. It's something that shifts when pressure is applied. And when a person is put in a situation where authority overrides judgment, where responsibility can be shifted onto someone else, and where consequences are distant or invisible, something predictable happens. People stop thinking for themselves. Not because they are weak, not because they are cruel, but because their mind convinces them that someone else is responsible for the outcome. This is where morality becomes fragile. The moment responsibility can be passed, morality dissolves. In the early 1960s, one psychologist wanted to test just how fragile that sense of moral independence truly was. He didn't ask people what they believed. He put them into a situation where belief no longer mattered. What he discovered changed the way we understand human behavior forever. 2. Setting the stage. Yale University. A prestigious, respected institution associated with intelligence, expertise, and credibility. The kind of place where people assume that whatever is happening must be legitimate and justified. Stanley Milgram, a young social psychologist, wanted to understand how ordinary citizens in Nazi Germany could participate in atrocities while claiming they were just following orders. His question was unsettlingly simple. How far will a person go when an authority figure tells them to harm another human being? To explore this, Milgram designed an experiment disguised as a study on memory and learning. Participants believed they were helping researchers understand how punishment affects performance. They were always assigned the role of the teacher, while another individual, the learner, was taken into a separate room and strapped to a chair with electrodes attached to his arm. The setup looked professional, clinical, and real. The teacher was seated in front of a large shock generator, lined with 30 switches that increased in intensity, labeled from mild discomfort to danger, severe shock, and finally a final switch marked only with 3 large X's. The device itself was fake, but the participants did not know that. They believed the shocks were real. They believed the pain was real, and the reactions they heard only reinforced that belief. At first, the learner responded with small sounds of discomfort, then protests, then louder cries, then pained screams, and eventually, silence. And the silence was the most disturbing part, because silence forces the mind to imagine the worst. Each time the participant hesitated, the researcher, standing close by in a lab coat, calm, still, and emotionally detached, gave simple, scripted prompts. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice. No yelling, no threats, no consequences if they refused, just the quiet weight of authority. And in most cases, that was enough. 3. What happened? Before the experiment began, Milgram asked psychiatrists, professors, and students to predict how ordinary people would respond. Their expectations were reassuring. They believed that almost no one would go beyond a mild shock. They imagined that most individuals would stop the moment another human being expressed pain. They estimated that perhaps 1%, the psychologically unstable, the disturbed, the aggressive, might be capable of delivering the highest level of shock. This assumption allowed society to preserve a comforting belief that morality is stable and that cruelty belongs only to the broken, the monstrous, the others. But they were wrong. When the experiment was carried out, 65% of participants delivered the final, supposedly lethal shock. Not a small minority, not the unstable, not people lacking empathy. The majority, ordinary people, people who considered themselves decent, people who said they believed in kindness, compassion, humanity, individuals who, if asked outside of the experiment, would insist they could never harm another person. But in that room, facing a calm authority figure, they pressed the switch, and they did it without shouting, without hatred, without emotional outbursts. They did it quietly, almost mechanically, simply because someone told them that they must. The most disturbing part was not the obedience itself, it was how natural that obedience felt. 4. Why it happened. People did not obey because they wanted to harm. They obeyed because they believed they were not responsible. The experimenter assured them that the responsibility for any outcome belonged to him, not to them. That small shift, moving the sense of responsibility from the self to someone else, changes everything. When a person believes that their actions are not truly theirs, morality becomes disconnected from behavior. This psychological distance is what makes cruelty possible on a massive scale. History is full of moments where ordinary people committed terrible acts simply because they were told they were not accountable for the consequences. When the mind accepts the idea that I am not the one doing this, the body will do almost anything. Obedience is not driven by the actual power of authority, but by our belief in that power. We obey to avoid conflict. We obey to avoid standing out. We obey to avoid being judged, challenged, or isolated. Obedience is easier than resistance. It requires no moral courage, no personal responsibility, no confrontation. And once obedience becomes easier than thinking, morality becomes irrelevant. The act no longer feels like a choice. It feels like a role being played. And roles are easier to follow than beliefs. 5. The psychology behind obedience. To understand why so many obeyed, we need to break down the psychological mechanisms at play. The first is authority bias. From childhood, we are conditioned to trust and follow instruction. Parents teach us that listening keeps us safe. Schools reward obedience. Workplaces demand it. Governments expect it. Our entire lives, survival and social acceptance have depended on recognizing who has power and responding correctly to it. So when someone wears a lab coat inside a respected university, the mind does not question their legitimacy. It automatically assumes they know what they're doing. They must be right. I should listen. The second mechanism is gradual escalation. The shocks in the experiment did not start at a high level. They began with mild, almost harmless discomfort. The participant made one small decision, then another, then another. Each step made the next step easier. A person does not wake up and decide to commit an atrocity. They simply follow a chain of instructions, each one only slightly worse than the last. This is the same pattern seen in corruption, abuse, war, and propaganda. Evil rarely begins loudly. It begins quietly, disguised as something normal. The third mechanism is diffusion of responsibility. When a person believes someone else is accountable, they no longer feel the moral weight of their actions. I was told to. It wasn't my choice. I didn't mean harm. These statements are common not just in this experiment, but in history. They allow ordinary individuals to participate in horrific acts while still seeing themselves as good people. And perhaps the most disturbing part of all is that the participants were not forced. They were not threatened. They were persuaded. They obeyed voluntarily, which suggests something deeply unsettling. Cruelty does not require monsters. It only requires a system that encourages obedience. 6. Modern parallels. If this was just an unusual experiment from the 1960s, the story would end there. But it hasn't ended. The same psychological patterns continue today, on social media, in corporations, in workplaces, in governments, in the military, and even in ordinary friendships and families. People follow trends not because they truly believe in them, but because others do. Employees carry out unethical instructions because the company culture expects compliance. Soldiers commit violence because authority frames it as necessary and honorable. Students bully classmates not because they are naturally cruel, but because the social ecosystem rewards loyalty to the group over loyalty to morality. Online mobs destroy reputations with a few clicks, not because any single person intends to cause harm, but because responsibility is spread across thousands of anonymous actions. When guilt is shared, no one feels guilty. And in each of these situations, the individuals involved rarely describe themselves as cruel. They say, everyone else was doing it. It wasn't my place to question it. I didn't want to cause problems. I just followed the rules. The modern world has not made us more independent. It has simply created more complex systems where obedience feels normal, rational, effortless. We like to believe we are free thinkers, guided by personal judgment and inner moral principles. But the experiment suggests something far more unsettling. Most people will follow orders, even when those orders go against everything they claim to believe. 7 variations of the experiment. Milgram did not stop with a single version of the experiment. He wanted to understand which conditions increased obedience and which reduced it. So he repeated the experiment with small changes. When the researcher gave orders over the phone instead of standing in the room, obedience dropped sharply. Many participants lied, pretending to follow instructions while secretly delivering weaker shocks. But when the authority figure was physically present, obedience remained high. When the learner was in the same room as the teacher, where their pain was visible, obedience dropped. When the teacher had to physically place the learner's hand onto a shock plate, obedience dropped even further. But when the teacher was simply one step removed from the harm, obedience soared. The distance between action and consequence made cruelty easier. Milgram also tested the power of group influence. When two additional teachers, actors, refused to continue, the participant almost always refused as well. But when those same actors obeyed the experimenter, almost every real participant obeyed too. People didn't respond to morality. They responded to the behavior of others. These variations revealed something critical. Obedience is not fixed. It depends on context, authority, distance, and social approval. Change any one of these, and the line between harm and refusal shifts. 8. Aftermath. The participants' reactions. After the experiment ended, many participants were visibly shaken. Some were trembling, some were sweating. Some laughed nervously, unable to process what they had just done. Others sat in silence, staring at their hands, avoiding eye contact. A few broke down completely, covering their faces, refusing to speak. And yet, when they explained their actions, the same pattern appeared. They distanced themselves from responsibility. They said, "I had no choice. You told me to continue. I thought you knew what you were doing." They were desperate to believe they were not the kind of person who could harm another human being. Some tried to rationalize their behavior, insisting they were only following instructions. Others experienced guilt that stayed with them for years. The experiment revealed something haunting. Most of the suffering did not happen during the shocks. It happened after, when participants realized what they were capable of. The moment they understood that the line between kindness and cruelty was much thinner than they ever imagined. 9th, final reflection. The Milgram experiment is not about the past. It is a mirror, a reflection of what human beings are capable of under the right conditions. It shows that morality is not a solid structure we carry within us, but something fragile, something that bends under pressure, authority, and expectation. The line between good and evil is not drawn between different kinds of people. It is drawn within each person, and that line shifts depending on the situation we are placed in. We are not as independent as we think. We are not as strong-willed as we hope. The experiment revealed that the capacity for harm is not reserved for monsters, for the violent, for the disturbed. It lives quietly within ordinary people, people who believe they are good. And the scariest part is not that people followed orders in a controlled laboratory. The scariest part is that almost none of them thought they would. Every participant believed they would refuse. Every person imagined themselves as the exception. Almost nobody was. So the question is no longer, how could they do this? The real question is much more personal, much more uncomfortable, and much harder to escape. What would you do?